Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over Game 8 from the 2014 World Chess Championship between Magnus Carlsen, the reigning champion, and Vishy Anand, the challenger. We have Games 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 left. Vishy Anand has to play the white pieces 3 more times, Magnus Carlsen 2. So Vishy Anand playing the white pieces today, definitely trying to get a victory since he is down a point at Magnus Carlsen so far, and again, there's just not many matches left. So he's definitely going for the victory here. Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces, trying to defend. If he could get a win, that would pretty much, I think, seal the deal. But all he really needs, in my opinion, is to go for a draw. He has white 2 more times, and he already is up an entire point. So that's kind of his strategy here. But we'll go ahead and start out the game. Starts with pawn to a d4. Again, we've kind of seen this all throughout. Vishy Anand likes to start with pawn to d4, and Magnus Carlsen that pawn to e4. Knight to f6, a pawn here to c4, pawn here to e6, and the knight here to f3. And Magnus Carlsen so far he's tried to attack this twice in 2 different ways. One has been the Queen's Indian defense. He's played this pawn to b6, and he's also played pawn here to d5, kind of the standard mainline Queen's Gambit decline lines. When he did play the pawn here to d5, this is actually the game that he ended up losing, and the Queen's Indian defense is what he actually ended up tying. So it's interesting to see in the game he chose the Queen's Gambit decline line. From earlier he lost this, and so obviously he's probably going to go for a different variation. So we'll continue, and they play the same moves for a while. So they were rapid fire through this because they had just played these same variations. Bishop here to f4, castle, pawn here to e3. And then the first novelty in the game was pawn here to c5. In the original game that Magnus Carlsen lost to Vishy Anand just a few days ago, he played knight here to d7. That didn't work out so well for him, and so he decided for more of a sharper line with pawn here to c5. Mainline continues with the pawn taking here on c5, which Vishy Anand did, and now the bishop recaptures here on c5. And I like this a little bit better from Magnus Carlsen. I always like to exchange, get one of your opponent's middle pawns, central pawns off the board, and I like to recapture, getting a more aggressive piece on the board. So this bishop here on c5 is very aggressive, controlling this long diagonal right here, which can be sometimes a weakness for white early on into the game, since this white king here on e1 is really only defending the square here on f2. So nice little square, definitely a better, I think, transition and variation that Magnus Carlsen went down than that knight here to d7, which just didn't seem like a normal play style for Magnus Carlsen. So much better start. Again, Vishy Anand still has a slight lead since he is white, but he's definitely going to have to find some nice attacking lines, or we could just end up in a drawish game. We now see pawn to a3, doesn't want to have to deal with his bishop coming down here to b4, kind of that Nimzo Indian defense where your opponent has their bishop here on b4, and then they try to exchange here and then give you double pawns on the c-file. Vishy Anand just doesn't want to have to deal with that. Knight to c6, developing pieces. A queen here to c2, again, just trying to complete the development here, also just trying to get a little bit more of an aggressive queen right here. And then a pretty interesting move for Magnus Carlsen. It looks, pretty basic, just rook over here to e8, trying to centralize it a little bit. But Vishy Anand in the press conference afterwards said that this move caught him off guard. Fabiano Caruana, one of the top players in the world, I think maybe he's even the best player in the world. Obviously he's not the world champion, but I think in a few years he'll actually be the challenger, playing whoever is the champion right now. But he actually said that this was kind of an unnecessary move from Magnus Carlsen. It takes him down some aggressive lines that Magnus Carlsen doesn't really need to be playing since he's up a point. He could just play for a draw. Magnus Carlsen not want to shy away from aggressive lines, even though it doesn't necessarily look like an aggressive line. It's definitely not a theoretical move that people play a lot. So Vishy Anand definitely was expecting something else. Said he hadn't really prepared for this move. He didn't think he was top level, as he said, so it was very interesting. So play continues after a little thinking from Vishy Anand. He played bishop here to g5, pinning this knight down to the queen. Now the bishop's going to come back here to e7, and then we have rook over here to d1, getting it on the semi-open square, which is always where you want your rooks to be. We now see Magnus Carlsen continue with his active play. Queen here to a5, recognizing it's going to be very difficult to go ahead and start to attack on the king side. But on the queen side, all of a sudden he can pin this knight down to the king. His opponent's definitely going to be looking to get his light square bishop involved into the game. Maybe castle on the king side for some safety here. But right now, this knight's not going to be able to move. So we see the bishop come up here to d3. Again, as we talked about, getting ready to castle on the king side. Wants to make sure he can freely move this knight around, which he can't do right now. Pawn here to h6, forcing the bishop to come back. And then pawn taking here on c4. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting for Magnus Carlsen. I'm not sure that he really needs to exchange here on c4, giving up one of his central pawns. He did have some other options. You know, rook over here to d8 seems fine. Bishop to d7 maybe, just completing his development here, getting his light square bishop involved. Maybe later, instead, he wants to bring his bishop over here on the light squares and control over here. But bishop to d7 seems fine. It's definitely better than it was before. And then he can get his other rook involved if he wants to swing over here to d8. Maybe the semi-open file here on c8, that works as well. So, pawn taking here on c4, a little interesting to see, but then the bishop retaking here on c4. Pawn here to a6, getting ready to push forward with pawn to b5. And then again, if he wants to, he can get his light square bishop involved into the game. Castle on the king side, and then we see the pawn to b5 as we discussed. Now the bishop's going to fall back here to a2, somewhat controlling this long diagonal right here, but both sides have their pawns here on e3 and e6, so it does mitigate some of the risk as far as mitigating some of the control that his opponents have for their bishops. This light square bishop, you know, typically controlling this long diagonal is good, but with this pawn here, it just really can't do much. Same thing with this dark square. It would really like to control this long diagonal, but with this pawn here on e3, it just doesn't have much to do here. So now we see bishop to b7, getting it active, involved into the game, controlling this long diagonal, which is going to be a pretty good square for this light square bishop. And then bishop over here to b1, threatening this queen up here to h7 if this knight is off the board here on f6. What's interesting is, just 17 moves into the game, Magnus Carlsen only used 15 minutes. Now, again, he's playing the black pieces, so he's defending, but he's defending extremely well, and he's playing very, very quick. If you've kind of watched this so far as all the games, it is not the fastest game of all time because, again, the pressure is so high. They're playing at a world championship level. Any mistake could cost them the title. So for Magnus Carlsen to play 15 minutes for the first 17 moves is black. That is definitely fast. Vishy Anand, on the other hand, has taken 45 minutes, so he's already behind 30 minutes. You know, that move, rook here to e8, kind of caught him off guard. He definitely wants to make sure that playing the white pieces, he's optimizing all his moves because he only has 2 more games as white. So if he doesn't get a win here, it's definitely going to put him under the gun and a lot more pressure with the last 4 games. We now see Magnus Carlsen bring his rook over here to d8, just centralizing his rook, definitely where you want to be on this open file. Magnus Carlsen's completely okay just exchanging off material here. Again, if he can just race for a draw, they would shake hands right now if they would allow him to, because again, he's up a piece or a entire point here in the match. There's no reason for him to try to do anything too crazy, and so, you know, again, if Vishy Anand wants to go ahead and exchange, that's going to be fine with Magnus Carlsen. The bishop takes here on f6, and then the bishop recaptures here. There's no real need for Vishy Anand to play queen here to h7, which he doesn't. You know, check the king after the king moves here to f8. All of a sudden, the attack is kind of blocked. They can't really do too much now. Maybe you just continue with knight here to e4. And the game just decides to go and play the knight to e4 instead, because, you know, again, your queen over here on h7 just isn't doing too much. Now the bishop goes back here to e7, and then centralizing a little bit more for Vishy Anand. So this is definitely good. He's trying a little bit to get his knight involved into the game, but it's very unclear how he's going to continue. There's not a lot of weaknesses from both sides of the board. On the king side, the pawn structures are pretty much equal. On the queen side, the pawn structures are pretty much equal. Both sides have equal amount of material, and there's just not a lot of critical squares that either side really controls that they can really take advantage of. We now see an exchange off the board, and then pawn here to b4. This really threatens an exchange of the queens, which is what Magnus Carlsen wants. Vishy Anand, if he wanted to, he could maybe bring his queen back here to c2, but that may just be a little too passive. So instead, he decides, okay, I'm going to have to exchange off my queen, but first he brings his rook over here to c1. We now see the pawn take on a3, and then the queens are going to exchange here on c5. And this is, again, what Magnus Carlsen wants to do. There's no reason for him not to try to exchange all the pieces off the board and try to go for a quick draw here. So knight coming back here to e7, rook over here to c1, and now we do see an exchange of the rooks right here. And then we just enter a game with two minor pieces and some pawns. There's no real way for either side to win this. Potentially, if it was bishops on opposite colors, maybe you can find a small advantage. But right now, there's just no way for either side to really gain an advantage here. Both players are just too strong in the endgame to let this slip away. So both sides start to centralize their kings a little bit on the board, and they don't play too many more moves in this particular game, and they were moving pretty fast. All of these are pretty elementary for this type of player. They centralized a little bit more, and then after this move here of 41, they decide to go ahead and draw. So Vishy Anand, I thought he played well. I don't think he put Magnus Carlsen in too many tough positions. Magnus Carlsen pretty much played normal Magnus Carlsen, and then he was able to just exchange off all the material without, again, ever putting himself in much danger of losing a point. I don't think he ever had a possibility to win himself, but I don't think that's what he was trying for. So congrats to Magnus Carlsen on the draw, if I can say that, because he is again up a point. Now both players, they have a rest day tomorrow, and then they come back. Magnus Carlsen has the white pieces. Both players have white pieces twice more, so Vishy Anand, hopefully on this off day, rest day, is going to take some time to reflect and maybe come up with a new strategy. Maybe he doesn't even try d4 next time, but hopefully something that can get back into this. I think it would be really cool if we could be tied up going into one of the last two games in this series. That would definitely make it exciting instead of just, Magnus Carlsen trying to play for a draw. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the series, and hopefully Vishy Anand can make it interesting in a few more games. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.